Hello and welcome to the pilot episode, the very first episode of the Danish bite-sized lessons. I am your host Chris Broholm and I am from actualfluency.com, and in this video series I aim to bring the Danish language in a more accessible format. So it's not page up and down about grammar and it's not endless words to memorize. It's more of a bite-sized course, so you can watch a video. It will be usually less than 5 minutes and you can pick up some Danish really fast. And this first lesson is an introduction, meaning that I'll go through some very basic Danish grammar that you absolutely need to know so we don't have to do it later. So with that said, let's look into what you're going to learn in this. What you're going to learn in the introductory episode, that's the one you're watching right now, is the 3 unique letters in the Danish alphabet. And that is quite important to know because when you see them for the first time, they may look completely foreign to you and you don't know how to pronounce them. And therefore, I'll just give you a brief introduction, give you a few examples of words that use these different new letters. The next thing I'm going to talk about is the 2 noun genders, where a language like German or Russian have 3 noun genders, male, feminine, and neuter. Danish actually only has 2, and that means that if you don't know a gender, the chances of you getting one correct is 50%. Those are better than the 33% provided by the other languages. And I'll be talking about those 2 in a minute. The last thing I'm going to touch on in this introductory episode is Danish verb conjugation. That sounds a little bit more difficult than it really is. Danish verb conjugation is super easy, and I'll teach it to you in a minute or less. And finally, I'm going to show how a German verb is conjugated in kind of a way to show just how easy Danish is. So, with all that being said, I think it's time to get started. So let's look at the new letters in the Danish alphabet. The Danish alphabet uses the standard Latin alphabet, which you know from English, but it has 3 additions. There's the A, which is like æble, which means apple. Then there's the Ø, which is like øl, which means beer. Then there's the final one is Å, as in opening, which means opening. So as you can tell, these are vowel sounds. Well, maybe you couldn't tell that, but now you know, they're all vowels. And they can be a little bit tricky to pronounce, but if you have experience from German or other languages and use the below vowels, then maybe you have a head start. For instance, if you look at the A, it kind of looks like an A and an E combined, it is the same sound as the German A with the dots above it, or umlaut as they call it. And likewise, the Danish Ø, which is the O with a dash through it, or a line, is the same as the German O with the umlaut over it, the 2 dots. So there's a bit of a head start. Unfortunately, they do not have the O, but that's just what you have to, that's part of learning Danish. And I'll repeat it a few more times. You have A for æble, Ø for øl, and Å for opening. So those are the 3 words, and you can see that I colored the words, and that will make sense in just a moment. That's all you need to know about the Danish alphabet. Of course, Danish pronounces some of the letters differently than English. We use different letters in different places and so on and so forth. But I think it makes a bit more sense to talk about the pronunciation of words. Like, I don't think it makes sense to go through every letter and say, this is how we usually say it, and give some examples that way. I think it's much better to teach you a full sentence and then how to pronounce the individual words. Because if you know how a word is pronounced, then you can also always apply the sound to other words. Whereas if you just know the sound, then it's really, not very useful if you want to pronounce other words. So, that's it. That's the Danish alphabet in, well, not a long time. But of course we'll come back to it in later lessons when it becomes relevant. The next slide is noun genders. And in some languages like Russian and German, noun genders are a bit more important than they are in Danish. Firstly, they have 3 different genders, which makes it slightly more difficult. But you also have the cases where they change, and so on and so forth. What you need to know about Danish is that there are only two noun genders. It can only be intet, which is the red one, or fælleskøn. The red one, intet, literally means no gender. The green fælleskøn literally means both gender or mutual gender. So in a theoretical aspect, fælleskøn, the both gender, encompasses both male and female, or masculine and feminine. The intet is the same as neuter. So if you look at my coloring, you would see that I have done intet in red and fælleskøn in green. And this is a very pedagogical approach. By the way, pedagogical is one of the few Danish loan words in the English language, so I'm proud of using it. And what you just need to know is that this is the format I'm going to be using for all the videos. So when you see a red word, you know it starts with et. Or if you see a green word, you know it starts with en. So if you want to say, for instance, house, as I put here, you say et hus, which means a house. And if you say en sol, that means a sun. Now, what can we use this for? Well, we can use this to form the definite form of the noun. In English, you would say a house and then the house. In Danish, it's a little bit different. What we do is we put the article in the back of the word and it forms a new word. So I have given you two examples here from the aforementioned examples, and that is that et hus, which is a house, becomes huset. And that's a very literal way of pronouncing it. If you said it just casually, you'd say huset. But in Danish, the T ending sometimes is not easy to pick up. Sometimes it sounds like it's a bit soft. So if you say huset, it's a bit more pronounced. But it's not, usually you just say huset, which sounds a bit like a D, really. But anyway, so et hus becomes huset. Et hus, huset. You see the pattern now? And then when you go to the fælleskøn, which is a sun, you do the exact same thing. You just add it to the end and it becomes solen or solen. So this is, I mean, it couldn't be easier. The one problem there is with this system is that there are no obvious rules. And I don't think rules make a lot of sense anyway. I mean, you generally just need to listen to Danish speakers use the nouns and then you will learn it that way. It's kind of like German, where, you know, they have 3 different genders, so it's a bit harder to memorize. But in German, what I remember from school when we used to do all these tables, and they said, well, if it's like a sea or some kind of water, it's usually feminine, and if it's talking about the weather, it's usually feminine. But there are really no rules in Danish like that, and I don't think they're particularly constructive if you could actually come up with some. If you have any rules, feel free to put them in the comments box. I personally don't feel like it's that constructive, but it's always nice to have some background knowledge. For instance, in Russian, I'm well aware that, you know, if words end in a or a vowel in general, it's feminine. If it's in, you know, consonant, it's generally masculine. But as I'm aware, there are no rules like this. And a word of relief, although you need to remember this, there is no problem with understanding you if you don't. We often have, you know, when I speak to people who aren't native speakers in Danish, they often use the wrong gender, and that is totally fine. I mean, it makes you, it identifies you as a non-native speaker, of course, but at the end of the day, I still understand it. The word doesn't change. It's just the article or the ending. So that's it. That's the noun genders in Danish in a few minutes. And remember these colors. Red intet, that means et, or add et at the end. Or fælleskøn, that's the green one. That's en, or en, and that adds to the end as well. And that's all you need to know. So moving on to verb conjugation. And I can say that verb conjugation is by far the easiest thing in the Danish grammar, because it's the same with no matter who is performing the verb. So an example on the right is the word to fly, and you can see that no matter who is performing it, like you know, this is the normal table, like I am, you are, he, she, you know, those tables from school. You can see that the verb does not change, which means that you don't need to change it. And this is a big relief for if you are used to German or Russian or other words that has a unique form for every single different speaker or pronoun. These, in Danish, the verb does not change according to the pronoun. And I've highlighted this in the table on the right. This is a strong verb, or an irregular verb, which is indicated by the fact that the past tense is different from the present tense. And I could have chosen a non-irregular verb here, but I just wanted to show you an example of how an irregular verb is. Because if you know irregular verbs, how they work, then you will also be familiar with how normal verbs work. And just a little side note, the verb flyver is made from the infinitive to fly, which is at flyve, and then you simply add an R to create the present tense. And as you can see, if you want to use the future tense, then you still use the infinitive form. Jeg vil flyve means I will fly. And you can see that it's very similar to English as well. Of course, it's not as similar to German, which we'll see in a second. So this is just a little bit for fun, but here you can see on the left, there's the table from before, Danish verb conjugation. Jeg flyver, du flyver, han flyver, vi flyver, I flyver, de flyver. Jeg fløj, du fløj, han fløj, vi fløj, I fløj, de fløj. And if you had to say it in German, it would be ich gehe, du gehst, geht, wir gehen, wir geht, sie gehen. So a few different forms there. And in the past, same pattern, ging, gingst, ging, gingen, gingt, gingen. So it sounds similar, but it's not the same as in Danish. And that actually wraps up the verb conjugations of Danish. Now you are an expert because there is nothing more to know. And don't be worried about all these advanced tenses like past perfect, present perfect, future perfect, and so on. You will learn those at a later stage, but if you're just getting started with Danish, then you're more interested in the columns on the left, which is present tense, past tense, and future tense. If you have those three tenses, then you are, well, already quite far. So that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, be sure to leave them in the comment box below. And if you want any more language learning material, like how I'm struggling with learning Russian, or if you want more resources for learning languages in general, be sure to check out actualfluency.com, which is my own personal blog. And that's it. This has been Chris Broholm, and this is my Danish Bite-Sized Lessons, episode 0. Thank you so much. See you later.